Welcome back to the AI Word Series, a series that centers on real stories, real lives, and how AI is shaping not only our business, but our professional context, and lifescape, as I like to call it. Each word is often familiar from childhood in many cases, but it takes on a new meaning when it comes to the letters AI, its hype, leadership pressure, and organizational change. This week, we're focused on the word AI and guardrails. It's a popular one, and it's how it's shaping both business pilots as well as use cases. I'm excited to have with me today, first time ever, two guests joining us at once. So let's see how this one goes. Yep. Well, and they're tech people. So, it's testing me. Michael Groh, co-founder at Crew. Michael previously held roles as a leading model benchmarking for AI research labs, as well as an engineering fellow and a Bain management consultant. And also with us is Alice Zhang, head of product compliance at Crew. Alice has held roles as in-house counsel and a former policy advisor for the United Nations with their AI use. Crew, in and of itself, is an AI agent platform for both loan servicing and collections. So welcome, both Michael and Alice. I'm happy to have you here today. Thank you
Well,
so much.
very glad to be here. Thanks for having us.
So let's dive right in. So when you think of the letters AI in relationship to guardrails, what's the first story, moment, or image that comes to mind for you?
Honest answer, when I think of AI and guardrails, I think of iRobot. I think of Terminator. Think, geez, something could very well go wrong, right? And that's probably the image that most people have. We all grew up watching these movies. We all grew up watching these videos, right? Terrifies us, right? You don't know what it is. It's an unknown, right? And it's kind of why it's so important that as we deploy AI, we do so responsibly, we do so with appropriate guardrails, and we
Right?
do so in a way that is not just enterprise friendly, not just consumer friendly, but sets society up, right, to potentially embrace AI as a tool that augments and enhances and shapes, right, the way they work, the way they live. Yeah.
Agree. And I think, it's interesting to me when we use the word, right? Like I don't necessarily think of Terminator. I think of literal guardrails on a highway. They're there to help us not fall into harm's way, right?
Yeah.
And so talk to us about the space that you sit in and how are you using guardrails? You're in an agentic AI platform. It's the forefront of what everyone's talking about today.
Yeah.
And just to set the tone for our audience, that agentic AI, in theory, has greater risk association with it than some other forms of traditional artificial intelligence, for example, which does not necessarily mean it's danger, don't do it, but it means the guardrails are more important than ever. If you could talk a little bit about that, like what made you decide to incorporate the agentic AI platform or the I should say that build based on the agentic AI platform? And how is that shaping the work that you're doing in loan servicing and collections?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm gonna let Alice sort of answer the questions on guardrails and how we're doing it, right? I think, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the AI part. I think when you think about AI, it's stochastic, right? Which means it's not deterministic. Agentic AI is stochastic. Sometimes it might, spit out answer A. Sometimes it might spit out answer B, right? So when you think about, I always say a 1% failure rate in a 10-step process will compound, right? And you're going to look at an excess of like a 10, 15% failure rate, right? Overall. And that's
Right.
not very good. So guardrails have to be in place to ensure that you are getting the results that you want across the board, right? It's not a 1% failure rate and one step is not good enough. It has to be practically zero, single digit basis points. Again, ideally zero, right? So as you scale this out, it works. I'll talk a little bit about the technical side and Alice can chime in on the legal side, right? I think for technical guardrails, the vast majority of leading providers now run simulations. Thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of simulations, right? Evaluations, right? To determine if it is appropriate for consumer use, if it is appropriate for enterprise use. So you can drill down to in what cases exactly will there be failure, right?
I think it's an excellent point because the guardrails and even the level of testing, all they have relationship to the use case. Is it
Precisely.
internal? Is it consumer facing? And in those variables that may, for example, you may allow a greater variant if it's a less critical use case.
Mhm.
And having the capabilities to recognize when those are at a zero failure rate, right? For example, and I mean, we could take this beyond mortgage and what it is we talk about that if you take it into healthcare,
Yeah,
for example, right? I mean, and other things that Alice, you likely have worked on in your career. There are points where zero failure is not it is the only option is zero failure.
precisely.
But there are other cases where that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I would offer an alternative to your proposition that zero failure in some cases is not an option, which is in some cases, perhaps AI should not even be in the position to make a deterministic decision, and that you should always have human review as an alternative, because that is a much more comfortable approach that gives peace of mind as opposed to constantly running simulations to ensure low error rates, right?
Point, right, and I think that one that maybe even just a reference point to guardrails is one of the guardrails can be that human in the loop,
Indeed, absolutely.
right? And
it's
that
a
and
pretty important one.
absolutely, I happen to be a huge advocate. Anyone who spends any time with me knows that I'm a big human fan. I believe we have amazing humans, and where their true power lies is taking that technology and utilizing the technology in its methodologies for how it's built and leveraging that given technology and putting the appropriate guardrails in place for whatever use case you have in hand.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely.
So tell us more about what it is you're seeing go on in the space and how are you interacting with clients and what do you see happening?
Well, yeah, this is a great question. We're operating in the most regulated space and the most regulated industry, servicing and
Financial
collections, right?
services, right?
I mean, if you think about it, there is really no room for error here, right? You don't really want to make mistakes. Like if someone, has a mortgage, right? You want to make sure that if they're paying over the phone, that you don't trigger the payment multiple times, right? If they're reading out their numbers, credit card numbers, or their, ACH number, you want to make sure that you're not compliant, right? If someone is, for instance, saying on the phone, hey, I need to I need to refi. I need to refinance my mortgage, for example. You want to make sure you give them the correct payment plan with the correct cadence, and that's exactly what's being implemented. Because here's the thing, it is people's livelihoods, it's their house, it's their car, it's their way to get to work, it's their shop. It's super important that you get it right. So, at Crew, we handle more than 3 million consumer engagements right now, right? Active consumer engagements. It is something that we battle test internally with simulations, but also at scale, right? We're lucky enough to have not. We're lucky enough to have run a ton of simulations that we have not had, many edge cases pop up, right? Or any edge cases pop up, right? But at some point in time, that could well be, right? And when an edge case pops up,
By nature of how the technology is designed, right?
like people, it's like
Right.
hiring a person, right?
Exactly.
Someone could just wake up on the wrong side of bed one day or just, make a mistake. People make mistakes. AI will make some mistakes. So when fewer mistakes than people, I hope, but AI still makes mistakes. So when that happens, you want to make sure that you have guardrails in place or you are able to easily spin up and implement guardrails. That's something we're seeing a lot from customers. The ability to remediate if you actually see any active issues. It could be something as simple as, baby crying in the background, right? And you knowing that, hey, that person is not in a, you probably don't want to chat with them now because they're really busy, right? And saying, hey, let's halt the engagement and call them back later and ask them for a call back later because you want to keep consumer experience, high, right? You want to keep consumer NPS higher. You want to engage well, right? It could be something as simple as, hey, I like to bring up this example in healthcare. There is a big difference between hypothermia and hyperthermia. You make kind of get the wrong word in there, you're in trouble. You're going to dispense the wrong medication, and it's just not ideal. So making sure that, hey, every conversation, every engagement, every agentic workflow isn't just checked once, it's checked multiple times, maybe by different AI agents, different judges, right? Having human in the loop, right? Being able to patch that specific instance if it ever becomes an edge case that has been identified, right? is super important to the customers that we have right now, because we are starting to realize that AI by nature is stochastic. It's like hiring a human. You have to set guardrails around it.
Well, and it's interesting when I was first introduced to artificial intelligence, someone suggested to me that when you're utilizing AI, you need to approach it as if it's an intern. And
Yes.
it just stuck with me because, right? Like we wouldn't let an intern run. We would let an intern, we would teach him what to do, right? No different than AI. We have to teach it,
Yep.
we have to train it. Okay. Then we have to test it, like give the person the opportunity to create and do the task, bring it back to us, let us validate it, right? And
Precisely.
then the more accurate and the more proficiency they demonstrate, then the more latitude that we're likely willing to give. And I think that it speaks to the human element, but it also speaks to the fact that not everything has changed because it's the same process that we can incorporate with the technology. And even within organizations, one organization versus another, not everyone's going to have that same comfort level. Some are going to require more and some are going to require less, which doesn't, from where I sit, it doesn't necessarily mean it's more risky. It may mean, for example, that an organization structurally has more guardrails or has different infrastructure that provides those guardrails differently, organization A versus organization B.
Mm.
And I think it's something that when is the human nature of us that we just want the answer, right? Just give me and then let's and hurry up. Let's yesterday with how do we balance that
Yeah.
given the change that's incorporating this in the evolving technology? And I think that's the other part of it. And you guys could certainly speak to this is how rapidly the change is evolving. Even what
Yeah.
was capable 6 months ago
Yeah.
is very likely a different conversation today. So let's go there for a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting that you mentioned this, especially from the regulatory and legal perspective, as we see increasingly, both in the US and in the EU and the UK, we see guidance from regulators pointing not to sort of tearing up or drafting up new laws, but to existing guidelines and frameworks and advising, for example, financial institutions to look at these principles within these frameworks and applying that. For example, the NCUA has issued guidance to credit unions saying that when you try to use AI, when you want to onboard a vendor, look to our existing like vendor due diligence guidelines. So from a governance perspective for an organization, the same principles apply. And I would say in the theme of this conversation today, human centricity is the thing to always keep in mind because of course everyone wants to streamline things and want to see efficiencies, but you always have to keep in mind who the end user is and the impact there. We talked earlier about high risk use cases requiring more guardrails and human in the loop. I think taking a step back, a really good thought exercise for any company in any industry looking at AI is to think about the philosophical concept of rule of law and what makes good rules and good governance and a good society ultimately. So, for instance, when you look at use cases of high risk, so underwriting, when you think of rule of law, one of the principles is that the law should apply equally and evenly to everybody. So when you use AI, you have to make sure and to think that there is no discrimination in place, there's no bias, there's no model drift, or at least you monitor the drift and you're able to make sure that all consumers get treated the same if they have the same financial record. I think that is always the good starting point as opposed to pushing too far for specific regulations because you're not going to get very far right now, at least.
Well, and
Yeah.
I think your point on, and it also goes to not everything is new, right? Like these rules and the context around bias and fairness, those have been in existence for a very long time. So in essence, I would take what you said, Alice, and mirror that to leveling up with the lens of AI that if we're applying artificial intelligence in a given situation, what is it that we already know about those circumstances? And what in fact is different, or is there anything different when we're incorporating technology to do something that maybe, for example, a human was more directly involved with up to a certain stage, for example?
Yeah, I think what Alice said is super valid. Fully agree with you, Brooke, as well. I think the other thing that we need to remember, though, is AI, like you said, is increasing in capabilities exponentially, right? I mean, we're seeing a step change in capabilities every 4 months. It doubles in capabilities every 4 months, right? And that's a pretty large step change, which means we're going to start giving it access to more information, right? We're going to start letting it, engage in more workflows and more automations, right? Trying to streamline and gain more efficiencies, right? But remember, like Alice pointed out, at the end of the day, you need to have some semblance of checks. You need to have guardrails. You need to have humans potentially in the loop, especially for really critical workflows, right? Because you want certainty. You don't want 99.999% accuracy. Imagine going to an ATM machine and trying to withdraw cash, and it only comes out 9 out of 10 times. Well, it's going to be
Right.
a little bit of an issue, right? So you want
Right.
certainty. Yeah.
Well, I think those are excellent points. And it also speaks to, even for example, some of the hype. And I'm sure you see it, right? We all have competition.
Yeah.
And if you were just talking generally to an individual who's trying to learn this process, right? It's an entirely different language. Even for example, the deterministic and the stochastic, I mean, those are definitions and words that we as business leaders, we didn't necessarily have to have is deep knowledge or deeper understanding about such things is our poignant today, right?
Yeah.
So what would you recommend that those in the space that are considering agentic AI considerations, what would you say they should look for?
Yeah, let's go. Yeah.
Yeah, a few places to start, I think. Accountability, I think, is a key word. So, as you are doing due diligence with a vendor and you ask them, can you explain to me how the model operates, what data it is taking in, how it makes the decisions? Don't go with someone who hides behind sort of the veil of IP and doesn't offer any deeper explanations. Because at the end of the day, regulators want to see a human live person, a department being held accountable. And have data privacy, of course, is important. So have clear view of what processes used and the way data transfers and reprocessing is managed. That's perhaps a bit too detailed. And generally, I would say have an established AI vendor model oversight framework, identify the use case intake, and be able to very clearly carve out which elements of the company systems will be touched by AI and to what extent. I think that's a good starting.
And you've literally just outlined the initial framework that for AI governance that Freddie Mac put in place as far as a requirement as of March 3rd. So here's the good news, right? Like Alice, you're not telling us anything that we shouldn't theoretically already be familiar with, and yet you're putting it in terms that make sense when not everyone has such direct access to those deeper levels of awareness of what the frameworks exist, what they are, and how they need to be built differently when the letters AI are involved.
Yeah, and thank you for highlighting that as well.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to come to a close. I knew we would be able to take this cup of coffee on for an extended period of time. And as we close, we like to close on something fun relative to Lifescape, whether it's in your personal and your business world. How are you incorporating AI, or what do you see being done that's you've have found useful of late?
It's a great question. Oh, what do you mean by
So-
personal? When you say personal life, I froze up for a second. We've been working nonstop. My team has been working nonstop. Alice, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I mean, I have a little bit of a personal life, so we are remodeling our kitchen. So I really love using AI to visualize interior designs. Good fun.
Yeah.
I've seen some of those designs. It's pretty impressive.
And you can even quickly change the colors too.
Exactly.
I'm a productivity person, so I've been using AI to kind of create my grocery lists, right? But more than that, taking it one step further and using agents to shop for me. So I've been using agents to buy some of my groceries for me. I will say this, it's gone surprisingly well. I've been receiving my toilet paper on time and everything. So that's what I've been doing in my personal life.
I was going to say, and it makes me smile. It's like, okay, well, I presume that before you allow it to check out, do you actually check the cart, or are you surprised by the delivery that shows up on your door?
So when I started this, I kind of checked for a while and I said, I'm just going to create a limit on my cart. Just let it run based on the limit. Initially, I was surprised that it got everything right. I'm going to be honest with you, right? In fact, it was once it was not able to get, I can't remember. I was ordering bananas. I couldn't get bananas. It was like, I'm going to just take the initiative. I'm gonna substitute it for I think it was apples. I'm just gonna substitute it for another fruit. I was okay with it, right? And now I'm just whatever it's delivering to me, I'm pretty happy with it. So it's running that part of my personal life essentially right now.
Well, I was going to say anything that it has the opportunity. I've always said I wished I had a second set of hands, right? Well, now you do. You have a grocery shopper. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you both. I very much appreciate your time today. Appreciate the conversation and very much look forward to our next one. There's lots that we can continue to uncover.
Perfect. Thanks, Brooke. Thanks for having us.